Good afternoon. It's time to start. I'll be very brief. I'm Mayor Doug Sprouse, and I'm going to make just a couple of recognitions. Folks here, we've got a room full of folks, and I know that Chief Peters and Judge Harper will recognize many folks that are here. I wanted to just recognize our city council, current council members that are here. Colby Fulfer is here. Rick Culver is here. I saw Mike Lawson, and also Councilman Jim Reed. And Jim, your mother was on the Springdale Police Force at one time. Yeah. Okay. So we are. I see one other face. I'm gonna take a moment and recognize, and it's just because I've found that if you control the narrative, you're better off. And a guy I went to school with, David Hyden's over here, and David's dad used to be, of course, Chief Wayne Hyden. And when I was in junior high, I hit Chief's car with a rotten tomato, and I'm better telling that story than David, because you can't believe anything he says about it. But I want to control that narrative. If he's in the room, I'm going to go ahead and get it out there. And I do know that I spent the next 4 Saturdays washing police cars. So anyway, we have family members here of John T. Hussey. I want to welcome everyone here. Some have come from near and some have come from far, and many knew John and many did not, but they're here to show honor and give honor to him and his life and what he did. And so thank you for being here and being a part of this. Back in May of 2016, our city council unanimously voted, passed a resolution to ask the highway department, ask RDOT to dedicate our new soon-to-be constructed Springdale Northern Bypass and name it after Patrolman Hussey. Again, the council passed that resolution unanimously, and then not long after that, RDOT passed their minute order, and that's what started all this in motion. So we certainly, Laura Vaughn is here representing RDOT, and Laura, thank you for being here also, and please pass along our appreciation to Director Bennett and all those at the department. Okay. With that said, I'm going to ask, I don't know if Judge Harper's coming or Chief Peters next, but they're going to make some more introductions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I just wanted to acknowledge some of the law enforcement in the room. Sheriff Holloway from Benton County, thank you for coming. Sheriff Helder, I don't know where you went, but I saw you earlier. Thank you for being here. Chief Cantrell, Major Denzer, Major Hoyt, Denny Halfacre, I'm sorry, retired Washington County. We have several retired people from Springdale. I wasn't here in 1975, but most of them were. We got retired Police Chief Mike Blocker, retired Police Chief Truman Brewer, Captain Floyd Hancock, Lieutenant Denny Upton, Lieutenant Herschel Harden, Tim Llewellyn, Steve Harp, and Mayor Hudson, who was on the police department at the time, Sergeant Tedford, FBI Agent Dick O'Connell. I know I've missed several people, and I apologize, but there's enough people in here that I'm sure I've missed you. I'd also like to say a big thank you to the Fraternal Order of Police. Our lodge is named after John T. Hussey, and they were instrumental in this. They pushed this. They wouldn't quit, and I really appreciate what they've done. Our dispatch manager, Teresa Hudson, she was also instrumental in this. She kept getting told no, and she kept fighting for it, and between her and the FOP, they got this done. And anyway, thank you all for being here. Judge Harper.
Appreciate it. I'm going to do some of the same people. I want to echo on Teresa Hudson. We wouldn't be here without her. She refused to let this go and just kept pushing it and finally got it done. I want to thank the FOP, because without them it wouldn't have happened either. Could the FOP members that are here stand up? Thank you. Also want to thank the Springdale Highway Commission. I want to thank the Springdale Public Works Department because they were notified about the sign, and within 3 days, they had it made and put up. It's already on 612 Highway right now. So that's quick work, and I really appreciate it. Some of these people are going to be speakers, but I want to go ahead and introduce them too right now. When John Hussey was killed on December 21, 1975, he was married to Tony at the time. They'd been married 13 months and 13 days. He was 22 and she was 21. Tony Boone is here today. Would you stand, please? She's accompanied by her husband, Judge Michael Gillette, who's served on the Oregon Supreme Court, is now retired, but served for 26 years on the Oregon Supreme Court. Also want to, like I said, I was a dispatcher on December 21, 1975, and I came to work at 7 o'clock in the morning. When I got there, I knew something was wrong because Sundays were usually slow in Springdale at that time, and the parking lot was full. I then found out about, at that time, it was just an abduction of John Hussey. But several people that were at the Springdale Police Department at that time have really stepped up. I don't think we would have ever, some of them I don't ever think we would have ever had a conviction without them, but I'm going to try to recognize some of these people. But first I want to recognize Truman Brewer. Stand up, Truman. Truman was lieutenant in patrol at the time, and him and Gary Swearingen and the chief at the time was Joe Sims. They kept the department together through all this time and were really instrumental in getting all the necessary resources so an investigation could be completed, which led to a conviction, which I'll talk about in just a second. Also like to introduce, you left out two, Nemo Britton and Tony Perrin. They were Springdale police officers in the 1970s, and I worked with them, and they're here today. Brief history of the case. December 21, 1975, Springdale officer John Hussey called in a traffic stop at 3:49 a.m. on South Thompson, the south end of the Springdale city limits. The license was JEX 966, and it was on a travel-all, international travel-all. 4 minutes later, his backup where the stop took place was south of the Springdale city limits in the city of Fayetteville, just a little bit south of the mall. For those of you that lived around here, at the time there was a Sambo's restaurant there, but then it was Hooters restaurant. And right there is where he made the traffic stop. Officer Tom Dickens arrived 4 minutes later, found Hussey's vehicle abandoned, his blue lights on, car door open, and no one around. An all-out search for Officer Hussey took place at that time, and he was found that afternoon. He had been shot to death, and he was found in the wooded area of the Weddington area. The travel van that he stopped was found close to the scene, and it had been burned. Intensive investigation ensued. On January 26, 1976, Malin Gibson, the prosecuting attorney, who you're going to hear from in a minute, filed charges against James Ray Renton and Harold Davy Cassell. Renton was placed on the FBI's most wanted list on April 7, 1976, the 340th person to be placed on the FBI's top 10 most wanted. He was later arrested by 3 agents in Aurora, Colorado on May 9, 1977. Harold Davy Cassell was arrested in Montana in June of '78. At the time of this abduction, Malin Gibson was the prosecuting attorney. But by the time these people were brought to trial in 1979, Malin had been elected circuit judge. So Kim Smith was the prosecuting attorney who actually handled the trial on Renton in July of 1979 and on Cassell in September of 1979. Both were convicted of the capital murder of John Tillman Hussey. James Ray Renton died in 1996, and Harold Davy Cassell just died this month, October 7, 2018, in Arkansas State Prison. Okay, the next 3 speakers I'm very proud to introduce were involved in this investigation. Without these 3, I don't think the end result would have been what it was. The first speaker was the lead investigator at the Springdale Criminal Investigation Division at the time. Mike Blocker. Mike later became chief. 1975, I told him the other day, I was 20 years old. I thought he was old. When Mike Blocker investigated this, he was 27 years old. I'm going to turn the mic over to him, let him say a few words.
I'll come up there if I'm expecting you up a fall. Again, I'm Mike Blocker, and that morning, the 21st of December, I was on vacation 30 miles north of Batesville, Arkansas, waiting to go fishing with a friend. And I get a call from Jeff Harper, told me what had happened, to get back over there as quick as I could. I gathered up my family in an old Oldsmobile station wagon and headed out to Springdale. I got about 30 miles and ran out of gas, but I was right near a mom and pop gas station, and I woke them up and made them give me some gas. And then I made it on into Springdale. And that was the beginning of my involvement. Once we got over here, of course, John was still missing. Then the fateful call came in from the man and his boy who had just bought a .22 rifle to go hunting with, about this travelall being set on fire off of Highway 16. And we all ended up going down there. We checked out the travelall. And I remember when we got there, we said, well, we don't know what happened to Johnny. He may have been in this. We need to preserve this as a crime scene. I said, well, about that time, one of the other officers, Springdale officers, had found John down in a ravine not far from that travelall. And of course, John was deceased. And then I realized, well, we got more than one crime scene we're going to have to preserve. And I mentioned that to Dick. Of course, Dick's with the FBI. He says, I'd never worked a crime scene. I said, okay, well, we'll learn together here. And of course, we did. We gathered up everything we could imagine as evidence. We were picking bugs out of the radiator of that travelall, and we loaded everything up in those things. And Floyd flew with Tyson Jet to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C., where they were hand-delivered. And some of those things turned out not much of it was ever evidence for anything other than our stupidity. But it was a combination at that time of the Rogers Police Department, the Fayetteville Police Department, Springdale, Washington County, Benton County, and most importantly, the FBI that was able to all work together to put people in jail over this. In investigating it, we developed several suspects over a period of time, and you've noted by Jeff telling you that 2 of them are dead that went to prison. The 2 that were convicted died in prison. That was Harry Davy Cassell and James Ray Renton. Now, there was 2 others that we thought of in this crime, one of which was Harry Davy Cassell's defense, and that was Carl Don McLaughlin, who he and his wife committed suicide with a weapon stolen from a Walmart in Stuttgart, Arkansas. And the last one that we never were able to make a case on was Larry Lynn Wallace. Well, I'm here to tell you today, Larry Lynn Wallace is in prison in Estelle, Texas. And he's been there since 1991, and his release date is 2043. And he's 1 day younger than I am, and I don't think he'll be around. I think he'll be another one that dies in prison. He's already been turned down for parole. So I don't have a whole lot of hope for him or wish him any good luck. Well, that sort of ties up my end of it, Jeff. If you want to go ahead. I didn't mean to speak so long.
That's all right. That's very good.
Oh, one other thing I wanted to say, I'm sorry.
I did that on purpose.
Hold on, Bo. I wanted to share one story with you, and Back years ago, for those of you that knew me, I had a service dog named Dover, which was a boxer. And I got him from a prison up in Kansas, and he was the best thing that could have hoped for to help me get through my trying times. Well, I always wanted to share him with people, so my wife and I would go to nursing homes, and we went to old soldiers' homes. And we went to the old soldiers' homes, which used to be the Northwest Regional Medical Center there, or Washington Regional, I'm sorry. And we were going through there one day, meeting with patients there, and the dog would always want to jump up on the bed if they were on the bed and want them to pet him and love around on him and make them feel better. And as we were traveling through there, we'd come upon a room where there were 3 caretakers, and they're trying to hold a man down. And he was struggling with him, I thought. I didn't know what was going on. So the dog and I went in there, and the dog put his front paws up on the bed, and the guy sort of laid back on the bed. And I reached over and saw who it was, and I said, get choked up, sorry. Joe, this is Mike Blocker. I used to work with your son. As soon as I said that, he grabbed my hand and squeezed it. And that meant the world to me. And Joe settled right down. 2 weeks later, he died. But I'll remember that as long as I live. Now, Jeff, thank you for carried away.
Thank you. I've done a little research on the history of Springdale Police Department over the years, and one conclusion I've come up with is Springdale always had the right people at the right time. Truman and I have talked about that today. He said it seemed like somebody always stepped up, and we were lucky to have Blocker and Truman and everybody that we had at the Springdale Police Department at the time. Floyd, all of them, Jerry Tedford. But we also got it real lucky with the FBI agent we had. The FBI agent who investigated this was Richard J. O'Connell. We call him Dick O'Connell. Dick was with the FBI for years here, was the lead FBI agent on the investigation of this case, and I'm going to call him up here to let him say some things. Thank you, Dick.
Thank you, Jeff. This is kind of a bittersweet moment. I have mixed feelings about talking about this case. Mixed because the people of Springdale and Northwest Arkansas should know what kind of great law enforcement they have. And mixed feelings because it opens a lot of wounds, especially for you, Tony. Anyway, Jeff said December 21, 1975. The night before, up in Rogers at a Campbell Bell store, which was a high-dollar department store, there was a burglary. And Bob Casto, who was with Rogers PD, said at that time, there's got to be a connection. And sure enough, there was. I'm up here, and I'm known around here, if you put a quarter in my ear, I'm good for 2 hours. But don't worry about that, because when I was leaving the house today, my wife gave me a hug and squeezed my hand, and she gave me 2 cents. So I'm here to give my 2 cents worth. And, I look around the room and I see a lot of people I know, a lot of faces, young and old, and I talked to the sheriff when he came in, and he said he was still in high school when this happened. And, it's amazing that, I look around and law enforcement has really progressed in this area, and the people of Northwest Arkansas really ought to be proud of their police departments. And, I got this case because I met John when he was at the University Police Department, I think before it became known as the Police Department, right? And usually a case of this kind does not get assigned to an agent in a resident agency, which Fayetteville was. And back in those days, our interpretation of high tech was an old fax machine with that stinky paper, and all that stuff. And that's about all we had to be able to get the messages, the written documents from Little Rock up here, and so I could share them with Blocker and the rest of the officers up here. And there were times when I'd get depressed about what was going on, and I remember one time I went into Blocker's office and I sat there and I was kind of complaining, kind of sitting there sucking my thumb saying, woe is me, and things aren't going well. And in his usual quiet, unabrasive manner, he got my attention, and all of a sudden I got back on track, and I was better from that time on. So it was good to have Blocker there, and I had to take my lead from him because the FBI, while they had some jurisdiction, they didn't have a lot of jurisdiction. In the early 70s, if you'll recall, there were a lot of police officers being slain across the country. So Congress passed a law that gave the FBI a greater opportunity to cooperate with the local departments. We couldn't prosecute them in federal court because usually the crime of murder was not a federal crime. The killing of a police officer was not a federal crime. So we started out at the crime scene, and Mike, you're wrong, I had done some crime scenes before, but here I was, a 35-year-old agent with the FBI. I had been in for 9 years as an agent, and I had never investigated a murder. So I had to rely on really the experts, Blocker, Tedford, Truman, Floyd. Was John Lewis in there at the time in CID? Gary Payne. And I had to learn a whole lot in a hurry. Usually I'll go on and on and on, so Jeff, cut me off when you...
I'm not going to do that.
We were at the crime scene and we were looking at, actually there were two scenes, the one with the burned out travelall and the one where the body was found. And as you can imagine, there were a lot of officers out there in tears, angry, distraught, one kind of or another, and we had to get them out of the way because they were messing up the crime scene. And we both, Mike and I, knew that we had to have good evidence in order to make this case because we were just without a clue at the time. So we had to clear the officers out and get the CID people in there to refocus their efforts, and we did take the bugs out of the radiator of that vehicle. And in the back of the travelall, there were a lot of ashes and a lot of buttons, like the kind you would get on clothing, metal buttons from blazers or jackets and what have you. And then we found out about the burglary up in Rogers, and sure enough, they had brought all kinds of different clothing, and they had jackets leather jackets and some furs and some other stuff, but the jackets had these metal buttons on it. So we took everything out of there, ashes, everything. The only part of the tires that were left were in the bottom of that travel haul. But there were another set of tire tracks there. And CID did a great job of getting plaster casts of those particular tire marks. And that became very important later on. And there was some guy over in Oklahoma, and I think Malin and Mike went over and talked with him, and he kind of pointed us in a direction and gave us the name of a woman that we probably should have known about and should have interviewed. But we were getting all kinds of information in from all over the country right away. It was from FBI offices. Agents were going out to work on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and finding out different things and feeding us back the information right away. And there were police departments in Houston and Dallas and Austin, Texas, and Oklahoma City. And they were all out there busting their butts to help us identify who the killers were. And we believe that there were 4, because there were 2 cars involved. And one of the cars ends up in Oklahoma City, and the agents went out there. Somehow, Malin, we got them a search warrant, but they got over there and they found the car that Harold Davy Cassell had driven. And so they found one piece of evidence that tied that car to Northwest Arkansas, and it was a motel receipt from the old Holiday Inn down in Fayetteville at College and Township. And then I think Mike told me, you tell them to get those damn tires off of that car. So we did. We got the tires. And Floyd took them up to Washington, and later on, they were able to, well, we did some fingerprint ink impressions of the tires first, didn't we? All of that work paid off because they were able to identify those tire tracks with those tires that had been at the crime scene. And even though Cassell later on says, I wasn't even there, you know, well, how in the hell did these tire tracks get there if you weren't there? This whole thing was a team effort. And, you know, a lot of the police departments, law enforcement agencies around here have been mentioned, and they all pulled together. And we had FBI agents across the country working with us and police officers across the country working with us. And I was fortunate. I had 2 partners at the time at the FBI office in Fayetteville, and one of them is still here, Jim Harder. Jim and Jack Knox gave me the time. They allowed me to concentrate on this case. And the agent in charge allowed me to concentrate on the case. And it was kind of unheard of that somebody in an RA would have it. And then we made Renton a top 10 fugitive. After we had identified who he was a bad enough guy that he deserved to be on the top 10 list. We got him on there. And I thought I knew something about investigating a case until that point. I had always been told you never want to be the case agent of a top 10 fugitive. And I didn't quite understand it because I thought it would be glorious. You know, you run this guy down and arrest him and all that stuff. Well, what I didn't know was there was a certain amount of paperwork that had to be done every single day. And that's when I learned how to really write and to dictate. because I had to send in a teletype every day to FBI headquarters about what had happened the day before. And that got to be quite a chore, but I would always be up at the CID, and I'd talk with Blocker, and he'd help me, and I'd write this stuff out. And then dictating was, I learned how to talk fast and how to get pertinent facts in there. So anyway, that went on and on and on. And then we finally found out that Connie Marie Caves was the female girlfriend of James Ray Renton after the crime had been committed. She was a 17-year-old senior from Salisaw High School, and he sweet-talked her and seduced her, and so she went with him. And we were tracking them for a while, tracked them all over the country, couldn't catch them. One reason or another, and we were just a day late and a dollar short. But then something happened, and Miss Caves left him, and we didn't know why. But I did go down to talk to Connie Marie Caves' mother, and she had been interviewed before, and she said she didn't know where she was, blah, blah, blah. And I finally said, well, when did you see her last? And she said, oh, you mean the first time? And it kind of hit me in the face, because the first time implies that there was a second or more. So we got talking to her and had kind of a, high-level discussion with her. And she told us that she was in Dallas, and we had a young agent down there named, and Jim remembers this guy, Del Vandiver, found her, befriended her, and talked to her, and all of a sudden, boom, she disappears again. And then we found out she was in Oklahoma City. So we had another young undercover agent befriend her, talk to her, and then we had him arrange for her to be interviewed by us. By us, I mean Malin and Kim Smith and Blocker and myself. And we went to Oklahoma City, and then this undercover agent brought Connie Marie Caves in there. And I thought we talked for 2 or 3 days, but it probably wasn't that long. But we had a lot of information we wanted to get from her. And one of the questions was, why did you leave him? She had been told about the killing, but she never believed it because she was in love with this guy. And then one day, in a drunken rage, he said something to her about, I killed that no good mother bleeper. And she left him. Well, he would periodically call her and talk to her, and but she didn't know exactly where he was. So the last thing I said to her was, when he calls you the next time, I don't care what he says, because he was sweet talking her, oh baby, I love you, why don't we get back together, one thing or another. I don't care what he says. I want to know what the background noise is. And sure enough, a few weeks later, he did call her. And she listened. And she heard in the background, American Airlines Flight 704 will be arriving from Chicago into Denver at 7:35. She remembered that. That triggered all of the work around Aurora, Colorado. And the agents there found him. And the team was run by an agent named Don Gunnarsson, who later came and testified. And there was no shooting because Renton was sitting in his office with his feet up on the desk talking on the telephone when agents came in from every angle possible. And Renton had guns in every orifice on his body. And there was a little discussion about this shouldn't have happened. I didn't have my gun. Somebody should have been hurt. And that came out in trial, too. And Gunnarsson had a few choice words with him. And, anyway, Renton got brought back here and was tried and convicted. Connie Marie Caves came and testified. Now, Malin reminded me of something. She had given us information that led to his arrest. She was terrified. So she asked if we couldn't do something for her. And the witness protection program was a fairly new deal at the time. And I mentioned that to her, and she said, well, I don't know about that. I wanted to go in the service. So we were fortunate enough to get a hold of Congressman Hammerschmidt, and sure enough, we got a few things waived, and she joined the Air Force. And she was at some distant location, but we were able to get her back for trial. And she testified about what Renton had told her that particular night, why she left him. And that was very important because we didn't have any eyewitnesses. It was a circumstantial case at best. There was a lot of information, a lot of evidence that got presented. And Malin had been elected judge, and so they would not let him hear the case. So they brought in Maupin Cummings, if a lot of you remember him. But Malin wasn't really out of earshot. He was in the next room. He was listening to what was going on. And Kim Smith had the prosecution, and he did a masterful job. And I remember the last day of the trial, he's giving closing arguments, and I walked into his office, and there he is, and he looked stunning. He had a dark blue suit, a white shirt, and a blue tie with the U.S. flag on it, several different places. And Kim was tall and lean and well-dressed, and he went in and gave his closing argument, and I can remember him standing there talking to the jury and pointing at Renton, and he says, "This is the man who did something. This is the man who did something else. This is the man." And a very powerful closing argument, and my last words to Renton were not very nice. We were waiting for the jury to come back, and I was sitting in a room, and some officers brought him in to use the restroom. When he came out, he put out his hand to me and says, "Mr. O'Connell, no matter how it goes, no hard feelings." And I kind of stood up and looked at him, and as I recall it, it was a rather loud, profane, "Bleep you." And that's the last thing I had to say to him. He goes down to prison, he's there for several years, and then sure enough, the son of a gun escapes. And again, I get a call, this time from Connie Marie Caves, who, while she was in the Air Force, she got transferred back to Central Arkansas, and she was terrified, which she should have been. But she left. He left Central Arkansas and bounced around several different places, and I tried to console her saying, the safest place you can be right now is Central Arkansas because he wants to be gone. He doesn't want to find us. He doesn't want us to find him. And it went on for a few months, and then he's down in Austin, Texas. And he goes with some guys and they burglarize a place, the alarms go off, the police come, but Renton had left. He went back to where he was staying at the Salvation Army. And some of the people were saying, you know, yeah, you got us, but you missed a big fish. So anyway, they go over to the Salvation Army, and sure enough, there's Renton. But he looked completely different than when he had been in prison. He was a good-looking guy. He had beautiful, longer hair. I never could understand why he was a criminal to begin with, because he had a genius IQ. The way he escaped was he was assigned to the library, and he had made and read blueprints for a living, and he finds the prison blueprints. And he reads the blueprints, and boom, he figures out a way to escape. He ditches the two guys that he escaped with, and he ends up in Austin, Texas, and gets caught, and he dies in prison. It's a hell of a story. And then Harold Davy Cassell got arrested in Cutbank, Montana. Now, you may not know where Cutbank, Montana is, but it's about 10 miles from the Canadian border, and it's a nowhere place. But he had done something and got arrested on some misdemeanor. His fingerprints hit the wire, and boom. So Kim Smith, myself, and Herb Marshall, who was sheriff at the time, flew out there and talked to him, and he told us to go pound sand, which we did, but we already had him in custody. He was later extradited back here, went to trial, and was convicted. And as you were told earlier, he died in prison just a few days ago. I don't know what else to tell you, except this case made me grow up. Made me realize what a job our police officers do every day. It made me realize that just because I was an FBI agent, I didn't know everything like I thought I did. There's a lot I didn't know, a lot I learned from these guys. Anyway, Tony, welcome home. Thank you.
Good job, Dick. We don't have the speakers listed on the program because we weren't sure who they were going to be. Kim Smith, the prosecutor that actually tried the case, was supposed to speak, and I've talked to him 3 times this week. He got the flu real bad, and he reminded me that Malin Gibson was the prosecutor when all this happened in '75 and was the prosecutor all the way through 1978 when he was elected circuit judge. Malin Gibson's our 3rd speaker, again, the prosecuting attorney at the time, retired circuit judge from the 4th Judicial District.
Jeff, you can be assured I'm going to keep it much shorter than you have heard before because he covered most of the same material. I really was invited up here to thank the city for getting the name on your highway. I think it's great that that young man can have his name on that highway. it's good for the city, it's good for the state highway department, and the bottom line is it lets us have some remembrance of a young man who gave his life for all of us. So I'm proud to be part of that. I also thought that when I came, I would make mention and thank the State Department again for that, and also throw in a thank of them for their great criminal investigation division. They have beefed it up and they've gotten pretty thorough with it. Now, when it goes past that, we get into Connie Marie Caves, and I think you've pretty well covered it. There's one point he left, and I have to bring this up. The vehicle that was used in that theft was burned out, but there were two items that were low. One was a set of climbers, pole climbers. That turned out to be critical. When I looked at that vehicle, and I was out there that morning, they called me on the radio. I saw those pole climbers. They were burned up, and I thought, oh, they're not worth anything, but throw them in and take them in. After we later talked to this girl, Connie Marie Caves, I'm sorry, back up. When we talked to the guy in jail in Oklahoma City, he gave us some information, and I wasn't sure just how straight he was or how much he knew. But I said, do you know about the vehicle? And he described it. I don't remember. I think it was a pickup, covered pickup. And he said, I said, there was a pole climbers in there. He said, yeah. I said, let me tell you about that. He said he was a prior pole climber for the electric company, and he uses all those pole climbers to commit his robberies. He said he picks out usually a store that carries relatively high dollar furs. He has an outlet for them. He said he will pick that store out, put on his pole climbers late at night, go up the pole and cut all the power, where there's no power whatever in that building. Said then he can get his stuff, get on his way, and go. That made a lot of sense. That pretty well pegged him to the car that this guy in jail was telling us about. So I just wanted to throw that in there. It's not all that important now, but it was extremely important to me at that time. One other thing I was going to point out to you, and I don't recall what it was. I don't guess it's that important. I think the FBI has pretty well cleared the thing for us, give you a good straight shot on what it was. I wanted to try that case so bad I could bite nails, but they elected me prosecuting attorney a couple of years before, and I just couldn't do it. But it was right. Judge Cummings, when he heard it, they objected to me being in the courtroom. Judge Cummings kind of lost his cool and really come unwound. We had to get him calmed down. And first he said, that guy's a judge, he's a citizen, he can stay in my courtroom anytime he wants to. Well, we got him hushed up. He said, I said, Judge, I'll be all right, because there was a hallway right behind his bench, so I just stood in the hallway and I heard it all anyway. Anyway, that's about all I have to say for you. But it was a great experience. I hope it never happens again. Springdale, that's not the first one they had that was nasty, and I had to prosecute that one. That was where the two boys got killed and a third one injured in this grocery store deal. But that one was solved in 2 days, 3 days maybe, real quick. We got lucky on that one, but that was a nasty one. And I think that one young man's still doing well, isn't he? We had one survivor and 2 deaths. Okay, that's all
Raymond, thank you. You've done this to me before.
There was one name never mentioned that I have to mention him. It was instrumental. Quimby Johnson of the Arkansas State Police. But the reason I wanted to say here was every one of you got one of those pamphlets when we come in. I want you to look at the picture. Look at the right hip of John. you'll see the gun that he was killed with. John had borrowed that gun from George Caplis, a policeman, because we had to furnish our own weapons in Springdale. And that gun was found about 20 yards from John's body, thrown out in the woods. I just want you, the policeman, to know one thing, that no matter what kind of cause you're at, a traffic stop or a family disturbance, there's always a weapon there. And you've got to be able to protect yourself from somebody getting it from you. And I know John would tell you the same thing if he was here. And the other thing is, never forget the effect you have on people. Because I did, and I regret that. But Joe brought it to my attention. Thanks, everybody. Last thing I got.
I've already pointed out Tony was married to John Hussey. They'd been married 13 months and 13 days. She was 21 years old. She's here with us today. I'm honored to introduce Tony Boone.
Thank you, Jeff. This is going to be difficult. But when Jeff asked me if I would speak, I said yes because there are a lot of people I want to thank and a lot of people I want to acknowledge. First, the Hussey family's here. The person that growing up John was closer to than anybody else in the world was Ross. And Ross is here, his wife Belinda's here, their youngest daughter Caitlin, and Ross's son is also here. So appreciate you all being here, and it's really good to see you. And I want to talk for a minute about John. And I promise I'll recover, because talking about John is a happy thing. Not everyone in here knew John. There are a lot of people here that did, but not everyone did. And for those of you that didn't know him, I want to tell you about him. For those of you that did, you already know this, but you'll appreciate the memories. John had a very impish sense of humor, very. He made the most terrible puns. He was kind of a practical joker at times, teased people unmercifully, and I'm sure that Ross could tell you a lot more stories about him. But he was seemingly always happy, usually always had a smile on his face. He loved to laugh. And in fact, our church members, John was the music director at our church. And one of the ladies at the church nicknamed him Sunshine because he was always smiling, and when he'd walk in a room, he'd just light up the room. He was a pretty good student in high school, but being in law enforcement was not his first choice. He wanted to be a pilot in the Air Force. That was his first love. That was what he wanted to do. But his eyesight wasn't good enough to do that or to even be a navigator. So he started looking to other things, and naturally that led to music because that's where his other talents lie. He was a very accomplished vocalist and could play the guitar, and that's what led to him being the music director of our church. But he was also interested in law enforcement because his dad had been in the military police, and he thought this might be a career path for him. But he was torn. He was actually a music major starting out in the university, and he loved performing. He performed at churches all around in the area. He had a contemporary gospel group that he started and performed in. He was excellent worship leader and song leader at church, and so he loved to do this, but he wasn't sure he could make a good living at it. So he was torn between whether or not to stay as a music major in college or go into police work. There are members of our church here that remember him, members of that choir that he directed. And you don't know this, but it didn't just impact the police department, it also impacted that church greatly. You've been given the date that he was killed. On that Sunday night, which was the 22nd, he was scheduled to direct and sing in our Christmas cantata at church. It didn't take place because he was murdered the day before. But I digress. Back to how he got into police work. He, being a Christian man, wasn't sure that God wanted him to go out and arrest people and fight people and handcuff people and throw them in jail. You know, people like to think of God as being a benevolent God. And so he was kind of struggling with that, and he was reading the Bible one day, and he came across a passage. And I want to read it to you, because I think for those of you that are police officers today, you should be aware of this passage in the Bible too. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Those who are in authority hold no terror for those who do right, only for those who do wrong. If you want to be free from fear of those in authority, then do what is right and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for good. And that's how John viewed his work, as being God's servant for good. And he was just as happy to go do a motorist assist as he was to arrest a drunk driver, because he felt it was truly a public service that he was called by God to do. And that's how we got into law enforcement. Now, for those of you that are police officers now, and I know, thanks to Jeff Harper, that everyone who starts at Springdale Police Department know John's story. But it has been reported often at the time of his death and since that he had only been on the Springdale Police Department about 6 weeks and therefore was a new officer. Well, that's only part of the story. He had been at, as Dick O'Connell told you, Department of Public Safety at the university, which was later commissioned police officers and went to the academy and everything right after he started. He was a police officer there for close to 2 years before he started with Springdale. He had been through police academy, had been through training that Dick O'Connell gave that department, and he was a second-degree black belt. So this was not some rookie who didn't know what he was doing, and I don't like the implication that it was, but that's sometimes what is implied by newspaper articles at the time. I say that to say this: what happened to him can happen to any officer out there. So don't ever think, well, that just happened in that situation because he was inexperienced. There were 4 men in 2 cars. They had automatic weapons, and they had scanners. What John thought he was doing was pulling over a vehicle for speeding and having expired tags. He had no idea when he pulled that vehicle over that there was that second vehicle driven by Harold Davy Cassell, and that the people, they would have driven right up on the first vehicle that was pulled over, probably with guns drawn. We don't really know for sure, but that's makes sense. So don't assume that simply because you're an experienced officer and you've had a lot of training at the police academy and on the job, that this can't happen to you. You have to always be on your guard. A thing is a simple traffic stop can, if you're not careful, cost you your future with your family. One thing that no one knows that I'm aware of is John had been sick all week long, the week before he was killed. And I mean real sick. He had had some sort of stomach flu. He couldn't keep anything down all week long. In that week prior to his death, he'd lost 11 pounds. But his sergeant, Sergeant Stepp, called him that night and said, look, we're shorthanded. I need you. And John, as sick as he was, I said, hon, you can't go to work like this. And he said, I really need to. The sergeant called. They're shorthanded. They need me. So even though he hadn't been able to keep anything down all week and was weak from being sick, he got up, got dressed, put his uniform on, and went to work. And that's the kind of man that he was. Now, I said I had some people I want to thank, and I do. At the time of his death, there were a lot of people that helped me get through it. First, my family, in particular my brother. I don't know what I would have done without his strength, and he's here today. Next, Dick O'Connell. Everything that Dick said today about what happened, and much, much more, none of it is news to me, because if you lose your husband in this way, you have such a sense of frustration and a sense of helplessness to do anything about it. And what is even more frustrating is to not know what's going on regarding finding the people that murdered your husband. But thanks to Dick, I knew. He kept me informed of the investigation every step of the way. He let me know what was going on. And I think that helped me keep my sanity too, because I knew that everyone, all the law enforcement in Northwest Arkansas, was doing their utmost to do it. And I thank Dick for that. I also thank Dick for another thing. Of course, when Renton was found, I wanted to go to the trial. Any widow would in that situation. So I was preparing to go, and Dick called me and he said, "Don't go. There is evidence that we'll present it, including photographs of the crime scene, that I don't want you to see, and you will wish you hadn't if you do." And I said, but I've got to go to the trial. I want to see what happens. I want to see that this man that did this gets what he deserves. And Dick said, "Well, how about this? How about I give you a warning about some of the things that I think will be too hard for you to face, and you skip those parts of the trial and then attend the rest." And that was the agreement we made. And so had it not been for that, I'd probably have terrible nightmares, worse than I have now, about what happened. And I thank Dick for that too. He's looked out for me all this time in that respect. And after Renton escaped, again, he kept me abreast of what was going on in the investigation. I also want to thank Mike Walker, not only for investigating, but for the first good laugh I had after John died. I'd just about forgotten how, but about a week after John died, I had been invited down to the police department, and it was around New Year's Eve. And I was there with Larry Lukanen and his wife. They had asked me to come down because I had never been in Springdale Police Department. And it was where John worked, and I wanted to see the place, and I wanted to see all the activity about the investigation. So I came down, and Larry's wife and I decided we would get a candy bar out of the vending machine. We put the coins in, nothing came out. And I was standing at the vending machine, kind of looking at it longingly at this Snickers bar, and Mike came up and said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I put the coins in, but I didn't get my candy bar." Mike took that machine and physically just picked it up and shook it. And all these candy bars came out. And he said, "There you go." And then just went back to investigating, went back to work. And I will never forget that moment. And Mike gave me, I guess, my first good laugh after John died when I saw him do that. Pardon?
I didn't take the candy.
Also, of course, want to thank Malin and all the other people that were named. Quimby Johnson, I do remember being involved in the investigation, as well as Dick and Malin and Mike, and all working, practically 24 hours a day at the time on this. And thankfully, I think there isn't anyone else who could have done more than they did. And the right people ended up in jail and died there. And I think that is just because John was only 22 years old when his life was taken. At least they got several decades of life, albeit in prison, beyond what they gave him. So I have no regrets that these men died in prison. It was what they deserved. I also would like to thank FOP and everyone that was involved for coming up with this idea and spearheading it, and for all the cooperation, and the Arkansas Highway Commission, and the mayor and Jeff and everyone with city government that was behind this. This will forever stand as a memorial to John. And a lot of people will learn about John that would never know otherwise because of this highway sign. Finally, I'd like to thank my husband. I think it's probably not easy to be married to someone who still honors their husband the way that I do. And Mick has never in any way been anything except supportive of my retaining involvement here in the community, honoring John when I could get back here for Law Enforcement Memorial Day in May, and indeed himself honoring John and what he meant to this community and the work that he did. I'm sorry that I struggle so much to get to this, but I thank you for your attention. I appreciate you all being here to honor him today.
Thank you, Tony. Would the Hussey family over there sitting here stand up, please?
I'm really not prepared for this. I got here and somebody asked me if I would do this, and I could not say anything. And Tony, it's so good to see you again. I don't think I've seen you since the funeral. And I appreciate what you said. And I want to thank the city of Springdale, the police department here at Springdale, for keeping John's memory alive all these years. It means a lot to our family. It's been 43 years. It's hard to believe it's been so long. And that night, I wish Chief Sims, I believe he's gone.
He
But
died.
Yeah. That morning, a knock came on the door, and my wife and I, we were spending the weekend at home. And I could hear the voices and my dad going up the front door, and I remember Chief Joe Sims told him that John is missing. And you don't forget those things. But over the years, I've met a lot of people that have known John, and I wish y'all knew him. If those that didn't, I wish y'all knew him. Because like Tony said, he was a tremendous guy. He was 3 years younger than me, but we were very close, and I miss him. But you know, just like Tony said about some of the things that he did involved in church, I promise you I will see him again. And he's up there with my mother. And it's just Joe and I now. We're the only ones left in our family. But it means so much to us what y'all have done, especially the Memorial Highway. You'll never know what y'all guys mean to me. And listening to the FBI agents and Mayor Sprouse and all these things that were said today, I wish I could hug each one of you, because y'all mean a lot to our family and what y'all have done, especially you guys on the front lines. I feel for you. I hope nothing ever like this happens to you guys. I hope this is the last sign on a highway in Arkansas or in the United States. It's getting pretty bad out there, and I'm thankful we have a president that honors you guys and the police departments all over the land. And so that's all I'm going to say. Just thank you guys for everything you've done, and I appreciate every one of you.
Tony, could you come back with the mayor and?
I'm also going to ask Laura Arda to come and join us.
You need this, mayor?
I don't think so. Can y'all hear me? All right. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all the family members, all the friends, and acquaintances of John. You know, as I was was sitting here and you introduced, or you mentioned some of the other church members from that time. I'm thankful to know of John's faith, and he's been someplace a whole lot better than us for a long time. So, thank you for bringing that up also. But on behalf of the City of Springdale Police Department, our FOP, and anyone else who made this possible, I want to present you with this small token, this facsimile of the sign that has already been installed, as Judge Harper said, and please, to you, to all the family, please know that our appreciation for John's life, for your sacrifice, and I hope this is something that can be meaningful to you. Thank you. Jeff, do we have anything
We
else?
have refreshments out there.
We have refreshments. Anybody wants pictures, anything like that, we'll hopefully, like everybody, be able to hang around for a little while. Thanks again for everybody.